Welcome to this week's episode of the Rutledge Perspective Podcast. And I am thrilled to have my new friend and dear soror, Karan Rhodes, as my special guest this week. And I'm going to introduce her to you really quickly, and then we are going to dive in. So Karan is an organizational strategist who is absolutely obsessed with up-leveling leadership capability and optimizing workforces to do their best work. She is the founder of Shockingly Different Leadership, which is a global human capital professional services firm. And she is the author of Lead at the Top of Your Game. And she created her own assessment, Leadership Tactics Diagnostic. Karan, welcome to the Rutledge Perspective.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I am so excited and thrilled to have this conversation. So, we met through a mutual friend, so you never know how things are going to happen, and then found out we were members of the same sorority, and we've been talking a little bit about leadership and all those kind of things, and it ties right into what we're going to be talking about today. And so where I would like to start is to have you tell people a little bit about kind of what you're doing now and this impact that you're attempting to make through the business that you've built.
Oh, absolutely. So, and thank you for allowing me to share my story a bit.
Sure.
Well, I've had, I had a long career in human resources, specifically as a human resources executive and a leadership development executive.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been fascinated with how people who really made significant impact within their business or their employer, how they got that done, right?
Yes.
And, being in over 20 years in the industry, there were two things that popped out for me. Yeah. One was that discontent and disorganization really boiled down to either a lack of leadership or a breakdown in what I call the people infrastructure. Which means anything that's associated with any, employee, staff, or the human element of business.
Yes. Yes.
And so long story short, I really wanted to open a firm that make a difference in those two areas, particularly in helping with people infrastructures and initiatives, and then specifically around my all-time passion around leadership development and leadership execution.
Yes.
The long story short, about 6 years ago, I worked with a research group to commission a study on trying to find the most successful tactics that successful leaders were able to use that really increased the probability of them making a positive impact. And out of that came 7 leadership execution tactics that really popped out, that seem that they do increase your probability of being a stronger, more impactful leader.
Oh, great. Yeah. Great. Well, and what I love, and you guys who are always listening to the podcast will understand, I love having another HR professional, because we both have had long careers in HR, that is not only moving into owning a business, but also understands the business and the impact of leadership on the business. And it's not just like the soft skills and the party planners and all that, right? Understand that it's a real thing, right?
It is a very
capital
real
asset.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. And so I want to start here, because there's so much I want to ask you, but I want to start here. I know you said, there was something that you started to see, and so you wanted to commission this research study.
Yes.
Take us a little bit more through that. What exactly was there something that occurred, or what gave you that idea to say, there's got to be a way to find out what it is that could really be key in helping to build and develop great leaders? And I'm going to actually do real research on that.
That's a great question. I would say that the seed was planted when I was the head of global high potential leadership for Microsoft Corporation. Being in that kind of role, I was part of a lot of think tanks, global think tanks, and partnered with executives from other major Fortune 50 companies. And I've always been passionate about just overall organizational effectiveness. Yes. And it really puzzled me why our senior executive leaders were literally dying to see more potential out of their top performing employees, well, all employees, but specifically their top performing employees. And then those individuals who were in my high potential program were dying as well to show what they could do. And for some reason, it seemed that there wasn't a match. And I wondered, where was the miss? Where was the gap? You know, if someone wanted to see something, someone wanted to meet the need, but for some reason it wasn't evolving. And then on top of that, when the employees weren't able to really demonstrate at their full potential, it really impacted their well-being at work. They ended up being frustrated. They didn't feel that they were being as impactful as they wanted to be. And if it kept continuing, eventually they started looking for greener pastures. And so the companies were losing their best talent, their intellectual property. They in their heads of those employees who ended up leaving. And I'm like, gosh, there's got to be a way to stop that ineffectiveness. And that's one of the reasons why, I tried to find out back then when I was employed, what were some of those root causes. But I quickly realized that it was deeper than that. And I needed to commission a research study with not only members in the Microsoft organization, but with organizations across the globe. And so that's what really drove the desire to open up and expand the data pool.
Well, and I think, especially now with so at one point we were saying post-COVID, but I don't know that we'll ever be post-COVID.
Right.
But in the midst of COVID, right. There's so much now, and I don't know about you, but I fall kind of in this really weird gray area. There's so much now power in the employee space, right? That the employee has more power to negotiate and determine what they will and will not tolerate.
They will, yeah.
And which is really nice, right? To see some of that pendulum swing, because it is forcing poorer leaders, to do something different.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that coin is businesses, a capitalist structure that still exists, that is still focused on a bottom line, that has promoted and supported and in some cases uplifted poor leaders and a certain method of dealing with employees. And there's a disconnect. So some of them are trying to do a little bit better not because of the goodness of their hearts, but because they're losing talent.
The bottom line.
Exactly. It's the bottom line. And so as I talk to employees, I'm like, look, yes, you have greater negotiating power right now, but at the end of the day, it's still a business, right? So you have to decide what your non-negotiables are and then be ready to walk away. That's so when you, and leaders need to be ready to lose some people, right? It's a turnover in and of itself is not bad. No. It's just what kind of turnover. So as you did this study and as you in your business now are working with leaders, how are you helping leaders balance? Because leadership is about behavior, not position, right?
It is.
How are you helping leaders balance this increased power and in some case, unreasonable demands, right, of employees with their own need to be better leaders and really understand the nuances in the gray area? How are you helping them navigate that?
That's a great question. And it's, as you can imagine, it's different for every individual, right? Because every individual and every company has a different operating environment. They have different values, norms. There's, different types of red tape and things that happen, right? So you have to get really specific on each person's individual quagmires, what they're trying to tackle. But at a Uber level, what I do say is that employees must feel comfortable in articulating what it is that they desire and how the company or employer can help make that happen from their perspective, from their point of view. And employers have to be willing to have those listening conversations and both need to be at the table having discussions on what could be a win-win solution. If there's a breakdown on either the employee not being able to articulate what they need and how the organization can help them, and or if the employer is not willing to use those active listening skills,
right?
then it's then that's the type of discourse that happens when both sides are saying, this might not be an ideal situation to keep this employment arrangement in place. So and we try to focus on that. And then, of course, employees always say, well, how do you do that? How do you make that happen? Right. And then that's where some of the tactics that came out of the research come into play. I don't know if you want me to share those at all.
Yeah, sure. I'd love you to.
Yeah. So employees always ask, well, how do I put forward my best self and lead as my best self and capture the attention of the decision and convince and influence the decision makers? And although out of the research, there were, over 50 methods or tactics that came out, there was a clear demarcation line at the top 7 that had the most impact and influence. So we decided, hey, let's focus on those top 7. Try to infuse those into the world. And if that would greatly increase the probability. So real quick, I'll just run this down. The first tactic we encourage employees or individuals is to lead with intellectual horsepower. That is all about bringing their knowledge, skills, and abilities in a very creative way to the organization. The second one is all about leading with courageous agility. And courageous agility is all about standing up for what you believe in, even if you're unsure about what's going to happen. The third is leading with strategic decision-making. And that's all about making sure that you're leading with a great decision-making process and bringing those that are key stakeholders in that decision-making process together. The fourth is all about leading with entrepreneurship. And that's about finding ways to improve on products, services, and processes within the organization. I can't think of a single organization that wouldn't love to improve their products or services if they always have great ideas. The fifth one, real quick, is leading with the drive for results. That's being tenacious about getting to the end game and showing results. The sixth one is leading with executive presence. And that's all about having the right presentations, data to influence those executives that are making the final go, no-go decisions that we're implementing. And then the final one is leading with stakeholder savvy. And that is all about understanding. It's kind of akin to emotional intelligence, but it's all about understanding all of the stakeholders that are involved with you professionally and making sure you understand their perspectives and value what they bring to the table too. And that a little bit of DEI and all that is included in stakeholder savvy. So those are the 7 tactics that have really popped out, and all of them are equally valid. And you use them probably daily. They're not rocket science kind of things, but there are times when you are in the work world when you might use one tactic to really make inroads into what you're trying to achieve. And then you might switch to another tactic, based on making progress or not making progress. So we help guide employees and teach organizations how to use those tactics to be more adept within the organization.
I love that. And I'm actually going to I realized I should probably put my phone on do not disturb instead of just turning it off, because for some reason, everyone is deciding to call us during this amazing conversation that we're having. And so when you look at those tactics, though, because those are so, like you said, it's not that it's rocket science, but people don't necessarily think that clearly, right? There's just 7 things to really focus on. And so when I hear you say those things, I think about the conversations that I've had with people about, you have got to master your skill, right? Master your craft. You have got to be able to speak up. You've got to be courageous, especially HR people.
Yes.
If you're not courageous, I need you to not be in HR.
That's right. That's right.
You've got to call the organization on the carpet. You've got to call employees on the carpet, right? Absolutely. You've got to learn how to walk that line of being a business person first and HR person second, right?
That's
Because
right.
if there's no
That's right.
business, nobody has a job.
That's right.
But there was one that you said of those 7 too that I think is really important for people, which is not only, mastering your skill and being courageous, but also the one where you were talking about, be able to be agile, be agile. And we often and think about stakeholders,
Yes.
right? Because our capitalism has moved us into shareholder mindset, not stakeholder mindset.
Absolutely.
And so when you're thinking about stakeholders, it's so much bigger. So how do you help, especially someone who is in corporate, say we're talking to somebody who's in corporate right now, who's like, man, I love what I'm doing, but I'm ready to be promoted, or I need to do something different, whether that's stay here and get a promotion or do something else. Yes. What is it about that knowledge of stakeholders that you can give to people to help them really get more savvy around that?
Yes, that's a great question. What the first thing I will say is, remember the conversation about your stakeholders, it's about them, not you. Yes. You may be bringing a lot to the table, but they really want to understand what's in it for them. How are you going to affect change? Why should they be your sponsors or be supportive or what have you? So you really have to understand their perspectives and how you can best help them, while also in turn helping yourself. And I shared with one of my mentees, she was asking a similar question. And I said, throughout my career, there's one question that I asked every single year when performance review time came, or when we had one-on-ones with my manager. And that was, what is the most important way or effort or initiative that I can do that would help your MBOs or initiatives or accountabilities for the year? What is something that I can do to really help both you as you're being evaluated and help our team? Yes. And usually the manager would give me 2 to 3 or what have you. And if I could positively affect or move forward or help them accomplish a few of those, then that was the basis of what I use for going over and above my core position. Because believe you me, I rocked it out every year. I was really focused on taking care of what I was supposed to do, taking care of my business, my accountabilities. But on top of that, if I could tackle 1 or 2 things, at a minimum, just one thing that was top of mind for either my manager or my skip level manager, and did that successfully, that laid the groundwork for a conversation of me performing at a higher level as compared to my peers. And that's, as you know, in HR, when we go through succession planning or promotion conversations, the question comes up, how has Karen performed relative to her peers? And if you give your manager, skip level manager, the ammunition to go in with pure data to support that, it helps increase, it doesn't guarantee, but increase the likelihood that your name will remain in conversation for that short list for promotion. And hopefully, you all out there, you could put it in your own words and, but hopefully that's a nugget that you can use to start preparing for those conversations for your next step.
I love that. And that actually leads me into this next bit for people as they are moving through this journey, whether that's to stay in their corporate roles or nonprofit roles, whatever it is, where they're an employee somewhere, or whether they're looking to move into entrepreneurship or do a hybrid, right? They want to keep their day job because they love it, but they also want to do kind of this thing on the side.
Sure.
Take us a little bit through your journey. Like, how did you start out in HR? How did you kind of walk people through how you moved up in Microsoft and in your career before you decided to start your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I actually, my very first job out of school was actually working for the Small Business Administration. I was a mentor to small businesses who did not have an HR department. HR was kind of newly created field that kind of dates me a little bit, but as a newer created field when I finished school. And it used to be called personnel back in the day.
Yes. Yes.
But I knew I loved business and I knew I loved people. And so I thought, gosh, if I could learn the business of people, that would be great. I started out in psychology and didn't realize that I didn't want a full career as an academic or a counselor in psychology. I really want to get into business. And so when I went for my MBA and discovered human resources, I was like, oh, wow, this is the best of both worlds.
Right.
So I started out as an advisor and then kind of grew my career through almost all functional areas. I didn't do benefits and compensation, but I did do talent acquisition, HR generalist work, talent development, and kind of moved up through the ranks. And then I really wanted to get executive C-level experience. And so I was able to do that in the corporate side of the house. And in full transparency, I was able to there was a program at Microsoft before it was cool to have one where you could open up a small business on the side as long as it didn't compete with the company's core business. So I was able to start out very small while employed. So I had that financial stability, had to meet with legal once a year to make sure
of course
all T's are crossed, I's are dotted.
Right.
But I was blessed to have that jump start and fell in love with it. Had rich conversations with my EVP, and she says, look, you're flying. Why don't you go and try this? And you can always come back. And I said, okay, I'm recording you saying this. So if that work, I'm coming back. But anywho, hadn't looked back since then. But what I really love is the opportunity to be able to help work with more than just one single organization. And help them fill a gap that is needed to get them going where to the point that they can carry on themselves and, work themselves. So I love the variety. I love it's so dynamic to work with so many different companies and leaders, and haven't looked back since.
No, I love that. And I think that's why, when people reach out to me and comment and things, it really is important for folks to know that everybody's journey is different, right? And different doesn't mean wrong or better or worse or any of that. It's just different. And so now you're hearing someone who actually started in small business administration. I think you're the first person I've interviewed who started off there.
Really?
Right? And then ended up at Microsoft and in an organization that actually allowed, promoted, supported side hustles, right? Because many organizations, people feel like they got to be covert about it and they got to be careful and they got to, and sidebar, I need all of you, if you're going to start a business while you're working, I do need you to really be cognizant of any employment agreement that you've signed. Because I've been in an organization where it was like, you will dedicate 100% of your time to blah, blah, blah. It was ridiculous and it wouldn't have held up in court, but it was still there, right? And everyone signed it. And so really make sure if you're going to do something on the side, that if it is even remotely close to what your company does, that you dot all your I's and cross all your T's, as Karen just said, because you don't want to have to go after that kind of fight.
That's right.
For when you leave, right? You don't want to do that. So I just caution you.
And one other thing, always, so once you make sure that is done, always make sure you do your work on your own personal laptop and your own personal sign-ins. Do not do a single thing on the company, even if you have approval. Because technically, if you use their equipment, it can be claimed as their intellectual property versus yours. So
exactly. You've got to protect yourself. Separate phone. I don't care if you get, which I stopped a long time ago having one phone that had my personal number and my company number on it.
Yeah, no, I stopped at two phones.
It's a pain in the butt to carry two phones. Just carry two phones, right?
Yeah.
Just make sure you've got separate stuff, because you want to make sure that you are protecting yourself should you go forward. So Karen, as you think through all that you've done, and the people that you've mentored and the leaders that you have, coached and counseled and advised and all of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
What is the biggest thing? This is the first question. What is the biggest thing that you have been surprised by?
Oh, there's a laundry list. Let's see.
Right, because you can't make this stuff up in HR.
I know
right?
you can. I think the biggest thing is how even the most successful leaders are very insecure sometimes and question themselves. They even have imposter syndrome. You would think if they've gotten to a certain status level or career stage that they would be a lot more confident. In some ways they are, but they still struggle with a bit of what I'll call insecurity, but it's questioning, am I doing the right thing? Am I putting the business in the right position? And I believe for the most of them, they know that they're impacting a ton of lives for their employees. They're conscious that there's a ton of revenue or that is tied to their activities. And they have a fear of failure, even at that high level. Now, they do as much as they can to network, ask questions, resolve the unknowns that are out there, but we all still have unknowns. And that's when you have to have that courageous agility to still go forth. You try to understand as much as you can, but at some point you're going to have to make a move and take the most educated step you can. But that was one of the things that surprised me about almost all of them respected and needed a confidant, someone to talk to, because they had underlying insecurities on how to best to move forward.
And that's so important, I think, too. I'm so glad you said that, because I think we often forget how important grace is, right? And it is, the further you go up, it looks all shiny and pretty, right? To be sitting in the big office and to be able to go to the meetings and to be asked to sit on the panels and the boards, but it is lonely at the top. There's so much that you can't say. There's so many things there's so much that you can't share. Having that confidant is critical. And then having an organization and people around you who can give you some grace, understanding that those leadership roles are not easy. So those of you who are going after them, know it's not all shiny.
It's not all shiny. Not at all.
There's a lot of work behind it. So then the next question is, for you personally, what has been your most significant learning over this, let's just say over this last kind of 10 years?
Oh, most significant learning. That almost everything is what I call figure outable. There will be a lot of roadblocks that come up or things that you're unsure about. But if you take a deep breath and be very open to researching alternatives, sometimes you'll have to go and interview and talk to others that might be a bit more educated or a bit more astute in areas that you're not as astute in. But there are very few situations where there are not alternatives out there. You might have to research and find them, and they may not all make you click your heels in happiness, but they're usually, you're able to boil it down to a few alternatives and then be able to identify the better out of the alternatives. So I counsel and coach a lot of leaders, to take that deep breath. Let's look to see where we can start sourcing what our options are, get as much information as we can, then let's sit down, map it out, and choose the best of alternatives. And then maybe even do pilot programs or test out thinking if you're still very unsure, maybe with a confidential group or focus group or something. But there are very few things short of murder that we can't figure out and solve.
Right. Well, and like you said, I love a good pilot, man.
Yes.
If we're going to test something, just call it a pilot.
Yes,
if people get really nervous, just put pilot in front of it.
They'll give you that grace.
Right. Because pilot gives you a lot of cover, right?
A lot of air cover. Lots of air cover.
We're just going to it's just a pilot. It's just a pilot. I know all 400 of y'all want to be in it, but it's just a pilot, right? So, it's okay.
Exactly.
And then the last question before we close is, what would be, so if you think about, the audience, people who are doing great, right, in what they're doing and just continuing to move up, but wanting to do great jobs. And some people who are trying to figure it out right now, right? Where do I need to be? Is this it? Is this really it?
Yeah.
What is a key piece of guidance for people as they go forward, after they listen to this podcast and they're trying to take their next step, either from a happy place or from I have no idea what I'm doing place? What is a key piece of guidance that you would give to someone?
Oh, that's a great question. I would probably start at encouraging them to understand what is their differentiating value. That I use that term quite a bit in my book, but what it boils down to is, what is it that you're bringing to the table regarding skills and abilities, but you also have a passion for? Where that your skills and abilities intersects with your passion. That's kind of what the differentiating value is, what you bring to the table. I'd have them start to really think about what that is, because once you know what that is, that becomes your North Star. And then that becomes the way you articulate your, elevator speech of value, or what kind of paths you like opened up for you, whether you know kind of where you think you want to go or whether you don't have a clue. You've got to make sure that you are comfortable and confident in your differentiating value, so that you can make the type of impact that you want to make in the world on your terms. And that's what's key.
Oh, I love that. I love that, because it opens up space for, as I call it, and I can't own this, I heard it from the head of HR at Marathon several years ago, is it allows you to have a career flow and not a career path.
Yes.
If you keep your North Star, you might deviate, but it's just that your path gets a little curved instead of straight, and nobody's path is always straight. I love that. Know your North Star. Know your North Star. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Karan, Sarah, I am so happy that we got a chance to have this conversation. This was great. And for those of you who are listening to the pre-recorded podcast, I invite you to join us, because this is going to release in August, next week. I believe it's the 17th next week. And we are going to do an after show on Thursday evening on Fireside. And you will get to come and join us, jump in the audience, jump on video, and ask Karan all the questions that you have, jump in the conversation with us as we continue to talk about how you really navigate this whole leadership space, because you can lead from the back. You can lead from the back. It's just about having, those 7 tactics, as he says, right? Understanding those 7 tactics and how they really translate for you. So join us on Fireside. You will see all the announcements coming out. And in the meantime, be sure and go pick up her book, Lead at the Top of Your Game. So be sure and pick that up. For sure, some nuggets out of there as well. And Karan, thank you so much for being on the podcast this week. I am so appreciative.
Oh, it's been a tremendous joy. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And we will catch you guys next week. Be sure to click a like, send us a review, send me a note and say, hey, would you interview this person, or would you talk about this thing? And go out and really make it a fantastic rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye. You have been listening to the Rutledge Perspective podcast. Thank you so much for downloading and for connecting. You can find previous episodes of the podcast on my website at laurelrutledge.com/podcast. You can also find me on social media at Laurel K. Rutledge and/or The Rutledge Perspective. And I'd love your perspective on the things we talk about. And if there's a specific topic you want me to cover, just let me know. And please share this podcast with someone in your village who may need this little piece of perspective today. And if you're so inclined, I would really appreciate a 5-star rating and review on the platform of your choice. Apple Podcasts and Spotify reviews are particularly helpful. Thank you again for listening. Take care.